Welcome everyone to a presentation from the Nevada Digital Learning Collaborative. This is a new initiative by the Nevada Department of Education to provide teachers across the state with resources for making this transition to digital learning a little easier in the coming year. So we'll have a website up, it's actually up now, but it'll have more resources in it soon for you to just pull down and use as needed. In today's session, I will show you how to move units that you've already created for the traditional classroom to online playlists. And I'll explain what that term playlist means in the context of education in a few minutes. My name is Claire Cummings, and I will be an elementary coding specialist at Dickens Elementary in Clark County School District this year. I previously worked as a third grade ELA teacher at Lomi G. Hurd Elementary School in Clark County, which is a technology magnet. And there we taught what was called personalized blended learning. So the units that you see today in my Google Classroom were used with real students in a real classroom. So this isn't some theory I've just created. It's actually been used and tested with students. By no means an expert. I only did it for 1 year. And even as I go through, I'll show you some points where I would make adjustments if I had it to do all over again. So today's agenda is pretty simple. We're just going to talk about what are playlists, why do they work, how do I make one, and then connections to the NEPF, because I know that's the big question. If I'm teaching online, how do I still ensure that I'm adhering to the quality instructional standards and practices that are in the NEPF? So I'll show you how my playlist directly correlates with the NEPF. And you'll notice there will be 3 question points. So at that time, I will pull up the chat and go through the questions that are in there. But that doesn't mean you have to save them for then. Anytime you have a question, just throw it in there so we can address it when we get to the question slides. We're going to start by looking at a tool that you could use with your students or you could use with your colleagues if you're a strategist or an admin. This is called Wakelet. And Wakelet is basically a site that you can curate and bring together resources from online. So you can store Google Docs or slides or websites or videos all in one location, and then you just send out the link to your students or your staff. So if you could pull up your browser and go to this website right here, bit.ly/playlist resources. That's going to take you to our Wakelet. So I'll give you a second to get that into your browser before I share my screen and show you what it looks like. Sorry. Again, it's bit.ly/playlist resources. So I'm going to bring up what the Wakelet looks like. So if you've gone to bit.ly/playlist resources, this will be the site that you will be looking at. So again, it is just a place to curate or bring together different resources. You'll see the presentation that you're seeing right now is on there. That's always the first question whenever there's a training is, am I going to get the PowerPoint? It's right there for you. So you have that along with a video that I'm going to show later, any kind of resources or tools that I talk about in today's presentation are here for you. So when you're done, if you thought, oh, I really liked that document I saw, it's probably here. And if it isn't, feel free to shoot me an email and I'll make sure that I add it to the Wakelet. So in here, as you saw, the presentation is right there, but also we're going to go right here to what's called Answer Garden. This is another tool that you could use with your students, and it generates a word cloud basically in real time. So if you could go ahead and click on the Answer Garden. And we're going to type what is one word to describe how you feel about next year. So this should be interesting. I'll start with mine, which is nervous. So I hit submit and it pops up in there. So go ahead and start submitting your words to describe how you feel for next year. And we should be able to see our word cloud populate right now as we are all typing in our answers. I will put the link to the bit.ly in the chat for anyone that is joining us. So you would go to bit.ly/playlist resources and then click the Answer Garden link. And once you're in Answer Garden, you're going to go ahead and type in one word to describe how you feel about next year. Oh, okay, someone said that they're typing and it's just not coming up. It might be because I have to refresh. Let's see. There we go. Okay. I refreshed it. It might not be in real time. Maybe it needs a refresh. Yeah, it looks like it does. So you can keep refreshing to see the different. See, this is the thing with technology. There's always something to learn, always some snag that happens that you're not expecting. So we have scared, unsure, nervous, concerned, uncertain, anxious, inspired. Oh, I like inspired. Cool. Yes. I mean, I definitely think there is this dichotomy. There's definitely this feeling of uncertainty and scared, but then there's also this, wow, this is an incredible time for us to transform learning and really do technology right. So I love that we have inspired in there as well in our different feelings. So this is one of the tools that you could use with your students, and that is Answer Garden. So if you wanted to see it when you leave the presentation later, remember it is just in the Wakelet right there. So we will get ourselves back to the presentation. And thank you for letting me know if it wasn't working. That's things I can't see on different ends. So I appreciate you saying that in the chat. Thank you. So what is a playlist? Well, typically when we plan a unit, we create some kind of assessment, and then we map out our lessons and the assignments that the students will complete each day. And this is all executed mainly by the teacher, who delivers the lesson, tells the students when to do the assignments, including the assessment. Everything is very lockstep. So with playlists, we're shifting some of that responsibility for the learning onto the students, and they are given the whole unit plan, including access to all the lessons, which when it's on a digital platform, that might be in terms of text or video form. But we're giving it to them all ahead of time so they can work through the lessons and assignments at their own pace. So a playlist is simply a series of tasks that increase in difficulty, essentially a backwards planned unit online. However, the term playlist is used because, like a playlist on your iPhone that you customize with your songs, online learning playlists can be adjusted based on the student need. So if, for example, in Google Classroom, it's very easy to just assign assignments to certain students. And so if I might make a basic playlist for the whole class, but then make those differentiated assignments for the students I know are going to need more support. Maybe I adjust assignments or I add in extra practice, or maybe those students that we know really need a challenge, we might put in some extension activities for them as well. So the idea is to really provide that differentiation like you would in a traditional classroom anyway. And so that's where the term playlist comes from. I want to start with this quote because I think it gets to the heart of why the shift to blended learning can be so powerful. Who is doing the work in your classroom? This is by Caitlin Tucker, who's well known in the blended learning circles, because even though blended learning is now a necessity due to COVID-19, there are so many benefits to switching to this model, and one of them is shifting that responsibility onto the students in terms of their learning. And a true blended learning classroom really combines classroom learning with online learning, but that online learning, students should have some control over it. They should have control over the time, the pace, or the place of their learning. And if you look at the right side of the screen, there's a lot of different models of blended learning, and playlists really fall under the rotation model of blended learning, specifically the individual rotation. So this is what my traditional reading block looked like with 110 minutes. I would have, this is before blended learning, independent reading time. Maybe students shared some of their reading in book talks. And then we have that whole group explicit instruction where you're modeling the reading skill using gradual release. Then you have your small group differentiated time where you're pulling students that need that extra support and then having centers for the other students to work on. Maybe a brain break, and then some heavy duty complex text work with some word study and vocabulary. So that's what it looked like when I did traditional reading block. And the playlist really replaces that explicit instruction and small group differentiated time in a balanced reading block. So students are still receiving the explicit instruction. It just doesn't look like a teacher standing in front of the room talking to the whole class. The students are learning via the video, and maybe the video is one that you pre-recorded and you are explaining the topic. Text, images, and assignments that they've created, again, that unit that you've just uploaded into the computer. And the teacher is now circulating and providing support on the playlist. They are now freed up, instead of standing in front of the whole class, and half the kids get it and half of them don't, you're now freed up to give that support to students that really need it and let the other students that don't just kind of fly. So it's really has a dual benefit for the students and the teachers. And then another big difference is that students are working on different tasks at different times. So you're no longer executing these daily lessons for the entire class. Maybe you are doing a whole group lesson during the complex text time that needs a lot more discussion and DOK 3 and 4. But for the playlist work, the students are just doing that at their own pace. So you may have students on the first lesson while another student's already on the 5th lesson. And that's okay. The idea is that they can kind of go through at their own pace. So when we plan for this, it's very much the same as using the backwards design model for a unit. You know, you're looking at the standard, identifying the big skills and ideas, and your daily objectives, although they won't be daily objectives now, they'll just be objectives, because maybe a student will fly through 2 of those in one day, or one might take more time on those daily objectives. So they would just be objectives. And then we're creating our assessment to match what that standard is asking to do. And then finally planning those learning experiences to go through to meet mastery on the assessment. So what are some things students could do as tasks? Well, there's a long list right here. They could be watching a video. They could be making their own screencasts where they're explaining a concept. They could be completing some offline activities. This is a big myth about blended learning, that everything is done on the computer and a kid is staring at the computer for 6 hours. That's just not true. You are really just housing the entire unit online so they can access it whether they're home or at school. But some of those activities can be offline. You could be asking them to look in their book for prefixes and find them and record them on paper, or they could record them in a word cloud like we just did. So it doesn't have to be all digital experiences. It's just, here are the assignments and you're working through them. You can see adaptive skill practice could be one. They could create videos and podcasts. Some of the assignments might be finding a peer and asking them to look over their work and edit it, which is very easy in Google Docs because of the collaboration tool. So if they're at home, they could find someone who's online and say, hey, can you look at my writing right now? Because that's one of my tasks for today. So it's a very varied amount of different activities that you could have the students do, but they don't all have to be online activities. So why use these? I feel like I'm a salesperson right now. You have no. So the big one for me has always been that students can work at their own pace. I found when I was a 5th grade teacher, doing whole group just didn't work. This is where my journey to blended learning started. I was teaching math and I taught it to the entire class, and I had one student crying because I didn't get to him when I was circulating during that guided practice. And I had 2 other advanced students who were reading books during math time because they had already finished their work in 1 minute. And I just felt that this wasn't working for all students. It wasn't meeting all their needs, and I felt burnt out. And so that's when I started getting into blended learning. And this really helps to let students work at their own pace, and they feel successful because they're not feeling that rush. If you have 10 minutes left and you're only on number 1, it's giving them the time to do it and the support from the teacher. As I said, you're freed up by not doing whole group, so you can go ahead and give the one-to-one feedback. When I did this a few years ago, or last year, I did not take any papers home anymore because students are working at their own pace. They're turning in the assessment at their own pace, which means I only have about 2 tests a day to grade. And so you grade them right there and you give them back. And then they either get more practice and retake it, or they move on to the next playlist. So that was a huge benefit, was that there's no longer this test day where everyone's testing, and I don't have that stack of papers to take home. Students are also learning self-regulation, and this is huge. When we tell them what to do, when to do it, they're never learning that idea of, oh, I've got to stay on track, or I'm distracted, and get back on task. So it really helps them to guide their own learning. For me, the big thing is if we were to do a hybrid model of 2 days in school and 3 days out of school, this is just one thing to plan then. You're not having to worry about planning for a full day of instruction in person and offline. It's here's the playlist and you're working on whichever piece you're on, whether you're at home or whether you're at school. And so that's a big benefit of doing that. It's definitely a mindset shift to say, it's not, this is my lesson for when they're with me. But I think with the hybrid model, it's important to remember that if we leave explicit instruction to only those 2 days they're with us, we'll never cover all the content we need to cover. So that needs to be happening on the computer as well. And then lastly, another huge benefit was subplans. If you have the playlist already loaded in there, the students know exactly what they're supposed to be working on. So you don't have to create kind of those lower level activities for the sub to handle. And you just have a subplan that's always on your desk, like work on playlist today, that's it. So it's very cool once it's done. And it does take that front loading and the planning on the front end, but once it's in there, you don't have to worry every day about those daily lessons. To get to this point though, it does take a mindset shift. And a big shift is that this is a partnership with our students rather than a hierarchy. So I love that kind of comparison. It's not me dictating everything. It's I'm your coach and I'm helping you to learn. At Lomiji Herd, we were actually called facilitators instead of teachers. And I really loved that. And the kids embraced it and the teachers embraced it. They were called learners and we were facilitators. And just that language change made it, gave us permission to not have to stand in front of them all the time and tell them what to do. It was, you are driving your learning and I'm here to support you. The other shift is that the computer is a teacher too. Oftentimes, we like to use the computer time as a little bit of an occupier while we're polling small groups, and it is beneficial when they're on their adaptive practice. It's not that it's not beneficial, but when you look at it as a teacher instead of kind of a babysitter, there's so much power in that for students to really own their learning and learn at their own pace. And then finally, technology should be used in a transformative way. So the other shift is that we aren't just putting everything online. That's a way to start, but we should always be striving to say, how can technology be used in a way that paper and pencil cannot be used? So you can just put a worksheet on a Google Doc, and that's a great transition. But then we have to think, let's go further. What can these tools do for students that I can't do just with a book? So that's another shift to think about. And on that note, we're just going to watch a quick video about the Samr model. And this talks about the different levels of technology and when we're moving things online, thinking about trying to get it to that transformative level of technology.
Technology has the power to transform student learning. But what happens when it doesn't? What happens when that class set of iPads is nothing more than a class set of really expensive digital worksheets? The Samr model tackles these issues with a focus on the intersection of technology and pedagogy. This model has 4 different layers, the first 2 focusing on enhancing the learning task, while the next 2 layers focus on actual transformation. With substitution, the technology acts as a direct substitute with no significant change. So a student typing an essay on a computer is merely swapping out paper for a laptop. With augmentation, the technology acts as a substitution with some functional improvement. So that same essay is now done on a Google document with the ability to have classmates leave comments on one another's work. With modification, technology allows for significant task redesign. So that same essay is now a blog post. Students are doing research online, editing on a shared document, and publishing to an authentic audience. It is no longer an essay. It is an article crafted for the world. With redefinition, the technology allows for new tasks that were previously inconceivable. So that same essay is now a multimedia package. Students are not only researching online, but connecting with experts through video conferencing. They are co-writing their posts with a digital blogging cohort from a...
Oh no! There's technology for you. So, I'll get you back.
And an edited video. Notice that the higher up you move through the Samr model, the more transformative the technology task becomes, both in terms of multimedia content creation and in terms of communication with the rest of the world.
I apologize for hitting the button there. See, this is what happens. This is a great model of technology in action. The video is also for you on the Wakelet. But that's that idea of progressing in the assignments to not so much more difficulty. It's a little bit more difficult task toward the M and the R, but it's also just more complexity and use of the tools in a way that you cannot do with paper and pencil. So as they said, modification is really about giving them that authentic audience where they can, they're blogging and people are commenting back to them. And so that is something to think about when you're producing your tasks. How can I give them an authentic audience? I will say, I don't know that I've gotten to the R very often because it's it's really hard to get all of those tools together and to train the students on all of those tools. So I think that it's just good to strive for that M and R and be cognizant of it, but I wouldn't stress out too much if we're not getting to the R all the time or even this year. And so it's not something that has to be done, but just something to keep in mind to keep those assignments rigorous and engaging and really meaningful for students. Again, I apologize for hitting the video there at the end. So we're going to take some questions. I didn't see any there yet, but maybe. Yes, I love the inconceivable joke as well from the Princess Bride, I believe. Is that correct? So do we have any questions from the content you saw so far? Okay. Well, hopefully that was super clear. Again, if you have any questions as we go along, you might have more questions as we go through my classroom tour. So appreciate it. Thank you. So in a moment, we're going to take a look at my Google Classroom and the playlists that I created for my students last year. And when I started doing this, I wanted a way to sort of categorize the tasks I was giving students. And to keep in mind that Samr progression as well, that things should get a little more complex. They should be getting that audience that they're giving their information out to in the world. And I really also like the reflection piece, reminding me to have the students, if they're driving their own learning, they need to be able to take some time to reflect and say, do I even understand what I'm doing here? So I use this, which is called a hyperdoc. I use this as a guide. I don't use every piece every time in the playlist. Sometimes I have several explains. Sometimes I have several applies. Maybe I skip the engage one time, or I have lots of shares. Maybe I add my own label. So again, just a guide or a reference when you're getting started for the kinds of assignments that you could put out there. We're going to take a tour of my Google Classroom and two playlists in there. And then after that, since the assignments I have in my playlists are geared more toward about 3rd through 5th grade, we'll also take a look at a hyperdoc, which is also essentially a playlist in one document for a primary skill, silent E. Because I know that's always the question is what does this look like in primary? So I'm hoping today to give you a lot of tips that will help with primary. So we'll go through a playlist there, and we'll also look at 2 high school examples, which obviously that might be too advanced, but again, just different ways that you could do playlists. I will also say that this can be done in Canvas, because I know that is the big question. Is if I'm required to use Canvas, can I do this? Yes. And I will show you what my playlist looked like in Canvas, because I actually did it first in Canvas when I took a class. So I'll show you some images when we're done with the tour. So we are going to take a look at the Google Classroom. Okay, so with Google Classroom, when you first enter, there's the stream. And I used to tell students to ignore the stream because it's just clogged with all of the updates of assignments I did and class announcements and all kinds of things. But I just realized in the settings yesterday that there is a button to turn that off. So where it says here in general, classwork on the stream, you can hide the notifications for your assignments. And that has just cleaned up my stream completely. So I highly recommend doing that so it doesn't get so distracting on your stream. And the stream will then just be used for assignments, announcements, or things that have nothing to do with the classwork that they need to complete, maybe a school survey or something like that. So you can see there was a survey I posted in the stream, and that's the only thing in there right now, which is so lovely. The units or the playlists are in the classwork tab, and Google Classroom just changed and made this update a couple years ago, and it has made a huge difference. When you're creating assignments, you can create a category for them or a title, and so that title is the title of my playlist. And then the assignments go underneath it, and you can easily drag and move them around in different order as well. So this one is called Describing the Narrator of a Text, and you can see these are the different assignments here on my end, but you can click them and they will appear. I did give students a pre-test. At our school, you could give a pre-test to students, and if they passed it, they were allowed to skip that playlist and go to the next playlist. Our theory was that it didn't make sense to put students through the work if they could already demonstrate mastery on that. So you could give them a quick pre-test. I did this on paper where there was, because I was trying to prevent cheating, I had the paper tests on the wall. They would just go and grab it, take it, and put it in a drawer that I would then grade that day. Now, this system of having paper assessments likely won't work for us this year because they might be on the assessment when they're at home, and then they're going to be sitting there waiting. Or you could have them come back and do it when they come in. It's kind of up to you, but I think I would go more toward digital assessments with the models of instruction that we're looking at this year. If it's complete distance learning, we're going to have to just trust the students on taking these assessments because they're going to be home. So I don't know that I would do paper assignments like that in here where they have to have the actual worksheet this year. That's just a little side note. So the first assignment was explain, and they opened up the Google slide. And I did this because you can provide more instructions in a Google slide than you can on the Google Classroom. It's just a little easier for them to process when it's separated. And also you can add some audio to it to support your emerging readers. So my students know they could click this link and then click this and it goes to Vocaroo. So Vocaroo is another tool you could use. It is free and you just record your voice and it gives you a link. And what's great about that is then you just take the link and then you put it right into your slideshow. And this is audio of me reading the instructions.
Point of view clues. In this video, two sportscasters are announcing the plays in a football game.
So it's simply me talking about what is on the screen. So it's really cool. That's the easiest way I've found to embed audio that doesn't involve saving files and things in your Google Drive. So then when you train the students that there's an icon, they know they can click that and get the audio support. So this is great for emerging readers. This is great for your primary students who aren't reading yet. And you could do a video if you wanted to, but the audio just seems a lot easier. So it tells them what the video is going to be about and their instructions. And they just go to the next slide, watch the video, and take the quiz. And the quiz was built in Google Forms. So there's a lot of linking going on. That's why they call hyperdocs hyperdocs. So it just had a couple questions about the video and point of view so that I know they understand the content from the video. I think that's really important. Whatever way you choose to do it, I think it's really great to always have some question about a video so that they know, or you know that they understood it and they know they understood it and they watched it. So if you have a question, then they have to watch it to answer the question. So those are a couple tools there. The next assignment was actually a question just embedded right in Google Classroom. So you can do that where you tell them, I told them to write one sentence in first person and one sentence in third person. And they can't see other people's responses until they respond. So they're not copying each other. So sometimes they don't have to go out. They could be right in Google Classroom. This was a lesson with me. So when they got to this point, anyone who was on this that day would come and have a lesson with me where I would do an in-person thing about perspective and how it's similar to point of view. Again, this is something that might have to be done as a screencast or a video instead now because I don't want them to feel stuck. If any of the other assignments depended on that lesson and they're at home on Thursday and they don't come back till Monday, that's going to be a little tricky to do. So I don't think I would recommend having lessons that are built into the playlist, but you could certainly say, wow, this group of students is struggling with the pronouns in point of view, so I'm going to pull them all today and talk about it with them. Again, I did another slideshow with the explanations, and this one was a lot more text heavy, almost like a lesson where I'm teaching them some vocabulary. And so you can see it had a lot of text for them to read. But again, the audio support is there if they were struggling to do that. And then in this one, they actually are watching, I embedded the read aloud of Diary of a Worm. And then they had some points that they were going to stop at and answer these questions to themselves. And then after they watch the video, they go back to here and they would answer a question again. So I knew that they watched the video and that they understood the point. And this was kind of like a culminating activity. And this was one that we did when this lesson was in person. And most of these assignments were on paper when I used to do this in person with students. So this is a perfect example of substitution where I took an assignment that used to be on paper and put it in a Google Doc. So it's not exactly transformative. And if I were to do this again, I think I would change this assignment. I think I would maybe make them make a Facebook page or something a little more interactive for the worm or for a bird or for some other animal to think about point of view from that animal's perspective, maybe a whale under the water. So this is a point where I'm critiquing myself to say, I definitely think this could have been upped in its rigor and its transformative nature as far as the technology tools that are out there. But again, I was also just getting started with playlists and saying, okay, let me just put this online right now. So that helps. just to have a place to start. Again, if you have questions as I'm going, just throw them in the chat, and once we get there, I will answer them. And then I did one last practice. We had a program called Exact Path, which is just like iReady, and you can assign specific topics. You can pull an assignment and tell them to go to that one in the system. And so I assigned this one called Spooky Stories. So when they logged in, they had an assignment in Exact Path for point of view. So that was just another last minute review of what is this about. And Reflect was a Google form. And this is where they are, we did the standard-based grading 1, 2, 3, 4. And so how well did you understand what you learned about point of view? This is really crucial because from this you can gain, okay, if someone's really still struggling, like I'm not gonna have them take the assessment. I'm gonna pull them and do some more review work to make sure that they feel comfortable before the assessment. By answering these simple questions about narrator, point of view, and pronouns, I can get an understanding of, are they on the right track or are they still confused? And then I always ended my Google Forms with, do you have any questions or want to tell Ms. Cummings something? And this is really big with building relationships online with students. It is amazing the things they will say in here. I kind of thought it was about the unit, and they will just tell me things going on in their life. And it's really cool. It's optional, obviously, but something to just think about to make sure you're kind of checking in with them is having some question like that. And then finally, the summative, again, was always on paper. So I had the summatives in a folder on the wall with the playlist title, and they would just go and get it. And there was a designated section in the room with dividers that they would go to and take their summative when they were at that point. So it wasn't completely silent in the room because other students were working, but those students knew they couldn't talk to each other when they were taking a summative, and there was a drawer to put it in. And as I said, I would usually grade it that day or after class, and then they would get it back the next day. So that's an example of a full playlist. I won't go through this other one completely. I just wanted to point out a couple different things. Sometimes I gave students a choice. So if Brain Pop and Flocabulary both had a video on dialogue, I would say they could choose which one, because some students liked one program over another. This one also had more paper and pencil activities, like a character x-ray was a little worksheet that they would do. So they would watch Thank You, Mr. Falker, and then they would do a little character x-ray in their notebook for him. You'll notice Room Recess. This is one of those sites kids like Cool Math and Math Playground that kind of drives us nuts. But there's actually some really great skill practice games in Room Recess for ELA. I think there's some for math as well. So I assigned it as a task, and they love it. And it's kind of neat to have that in there, and they feel like they're playing games, but they're also learning. And then finally, this was a different kind of share here where they would write down their internal and external traits, and then they went on Class Dojo portfolio. So on Class Dojo, you can have them record a video or take a photo or do a drawing, and it creates a portfolio that their parents can see. So this is how I gave them an authentic audience. They talked about their internal and external traits on a video, and then their parents got to watch it and comment, and it was really neat to see the parents get engaged that way, and the students all feel like they're on YouTube, and it's hilarious. So, hi guys, that's how they start their video. You really see students who are hesitant to share in class, they really open up on those portfolio videos. So that is a tour of my Google Classroom playlist. I know that was a lot, so please, again, put some questions in there because I know you probably have some. So this is a hyperdoc or a playlist for primary, and this is Nadine Gilkison. I have linked to her kindergarten, first grade, and second grade hyperdocs in the Wakelet that we saw at the beginning. She just kind of does these really amazing graphic, exciting slideshows for kids in those primary grades. So I highly recommend looking at those, and you can copy them, make a copy in Google Slides and adjust them for yourself. So for Explore, she started with 2 videos for the students to watch. And she even has this little image right here so they know they can click that to make it bigger. And she may have also done an explanation to the class before you know, some modeling on the screen of what to do before she sent it to them. Then there's some practice sites where you tap and go to the link to practice Silent E. Again, some more videos for the students to watch. So those were, she did 3 explores there. Explain, she has the students type in this box here what they're, to explain what Silent E is, or they could take their iPad and scan the QR code, which would take them to Padlet, which is a collaborative bulletin board kind of site. I'll show you that at the end of today's presentation. This is really cool. She had images on the side, and whether they were not a Silent E or a Silent E, and the students sort them. So when we think about sorts, I always think about paper pencil, but you could definitely do it online as well. So pin, not a Silent E; tub, not a Silent E; tape, yes, a Silent E. So that's really cool, and you get a quick check for the students to see, do they understand what they're doing? And then she ended with create, where it says to use the shape tools to create 2 images that represent Silent E on the next slide. Again, she may have done a video or some audio support to explain this task to students, but here you can see she made cake with the shapes. So you would then make tape or another Silent E rake word here using your shape tools, where you would kind of draw them in and make the word that you are describing. So I thought that was a very interactive, cool playlist. And again, you could insert slides for some students that need the extra support. And then finally, we're just going to look at a couple high school examples. They did them in a document right when they completed it off to the side. This works. I like doing the separate assignments in Canvas and in Google Classroom because it grays it out when the students mark it as done. And it just is easier for them to pick up where they left off. It's also easy for me to see where they are in their playlist rather than going into all the different documents. But you can see very similar language, analyze, watch. She has some videos that she made herself. They're going out and looking at famous speeches and completing forms. She did have Tucker time, as she called it, which is coming to her and having her edit your essay. So this is for writing. Again, this is linked in the Wakelet, so you can access it. And then she has some interactive, some sites where they do some skill practice, like No Red Ink, which is a grammar site. So very similar to what we've seen so far. And this high school one is also similar, but instead of little rows, it's kind of bigger blocks. But you can see they're watching a video on YouTube of reflections. And then there's some practice where they're actually doing it. And then it says, watch the video to check your work. So again, they don't need the teacher to tell them the answer. Here's the answer in a video. And then they have checkpoints where they go to IXL, which is free skill practice, and they try to challenge themselves to get a high score. So again, this is another example, and this is with math to show that there's different ways to do it for different subjects. It's kind of up to you, your preference, and how you want to structure it. So that was a lot. So I'm happy to answer questions about those different playlists if you have them. So I'm going to go back to our presentation here. And I'll just quickly show you, this is how it looks in Canvas. If you haven't used Canvas, the students will get a list of their assignments, just like in Google Classroom. But then when they click on each assignment, it pulls up a page. And so you do have to do a little more designing of the pages with the headers and the text and the images in Canvas that you don't have to do in Google Classroom, but it does still give the students a list of their assignments that they have to do. Okay, let's take some questions. Oh, there we go. Excellent questions, here we go. Oh, yes, that's a great idea, Heidi. So she said that you could use Scratch to create your character. for point of view and do a little storyline of what they're thinking and how they're viewing things, I think that's amazing. And that really brings in some coding as well, which is great. Gabrielle says, about how long does it take to create a unit playlist? Not as long as you'd think. I also highly recommend collaborating with your fellow teachers and maybe say assigning different units to each other, and that way everyone's working on a different one simultaneously and you can upload them so they're ready for the next student when they get through it. I would say, oh, this is a tough one because in Google Classroom it's a little faster. Probably a couple days, maybe, like not full days, but a couple like prep periods or so. If you're using a lot of material you already have. So if you definitely need the unit plan already because you need to know what your objectives are. But if you already have a unit plan and you already have your materials and assignments that you normally do for your units, I would start by uploading those kind of things and making paper assignments Google Docs, and then start deciding, well, maybe this could actually be a scratch assignment like Heidi said, or maybe this could be a video instead. So that's what I would do, is take what you have already and kind of get it on there. If you already teach with Google Slides or PowerPoint, that really helps because you can put that on and make a screencast over it of your voice talking, and there's your explicit instruction. So if you're making your own videos, it does take longer. Probably about a week, I would say, of prep periods is probably more realistic, I would say, for a unit. But also, like I said, try to use what you already have. I see the unit more as a standard. Yes, so a unit is covering a standard and it's daily objectives to get to that standard. So standards are often very chunky, like compare and contrast the setting, characters, and plot of a text. Students are going to need daily objectives on all of those pieces. They're going to need an objective on how to compare and contrast. They're going to need an objective on how to find setting. They're going to need an objective on character traits. So yes, a unit is a standard broken down into all the pieces that would allow me to understand that standard. And that's where resources like Curriculum Engine come in handy, where they've unpacked the standard into different objectives. Suman says, for primary, would you recommend the model you created in Google Classroom or what Nadine did? Yours has multiple assignments in different locations and Nadine's was all in one slide deck. What would be best for primary? I haven't taught primary, so I don't know if someone else wants to chime in on what they think, but I personally think that breaking off those pieces from her Google slide into individual slides is better, because I really also think kids like that feeling of accomplishment. Like, I did it, I finished something today, and they got to mark it as done. So I think I would take her Google slides, because I think students might get back into it and be confused where they are, and they might watch those videos a million times. So I would take her one slide, and that's a task, and make another slideshow for the other slide. That's what I would do personally, because I think that students feel that sense of success, and you can also see their progression a little easier than going into each of their slides. Brittany asks, so you mentioned that you grade as you go. How does that work in regard to report cards and progress reports? That's a great question. So it would mean that on some students' report cards or progress reports, they have a grade in a category that other students don't. Now, obviously, a lot of what I'm saying will be kind of up to your administration if they're okay with that. But I can think of times when I've given out a progress report and some students don't have a grade for a standard, and that's because they were absent and I haven't graded their test yet. So I think there's some flexibility there. But yes, so some students will already in their progress report will have a grade for a standard that other kids don't because they were that far ahead. And that's just kind of how it goes. Heidi mentioned that there's coachben.org has some great resources for primary as well. Yes, I linked to him in the Wakelet. He's a kinder teacher in California, And through the entire remote learning in the spring, he taught his kinders all online. And he does some really cool stuff. And I'll tell you a couple other resources later that he uses that are really phenomenal for getting students to do online activities. Brittany asks, do you give access to all units with due dates or certain units within a set amount of time? It made better sense in my head. Okay. Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay. Yes. So I did not give set due dates when I did it, and it was a huge regret of mine. So I definitely would give suggested due dates and kind of try to estimate. I mean, we already know how long a unit takes when we're doing it in person. So I would give that amount of time to students, whether it's 2 weeks, maybe, and then maybe a buffer of a few days for the kids that might take a little longer. But I would give a suggested due date, and not you're penalized, you get an F if you don't get to that due date. But I did find students would take way too long because there was no due date. So I definitely would say, yes, this unit is due in 2 weeks or 2.5 weeks, and here's the due date, and go. And then they'd work at their own pace. But then obviously the students that are taking a little longer, you can give them the flexibility. Heidi asks, could you create your playlist as a thematic unit? Most definitely, yes. That would be really cool. I've seen some hyperdocs where teachers taught main idea completely through looking at fidget spinners. Those were really popular a few years ago. I don't know if they are anymore. So the whole thing was about fidget spinners, and the kids were looking at actually, no, it was a kind of pros and cons unit and, kind of argument unit. And so they were looking at different articles about fidget spinners from different experts and whether they are good for kids or not good for kids. And then they had to create their argument at the end based on that. So yes, you could definitely do thematic units where you take a standard, and I'm going to teach main idea, but I'm going to teach it through dinosaurs, or whatever. So yeah, I think that makes it even a little more exciting for students where before they even get into the skill of reading, maybe they're getting to explore all about dinosaurs and they just love it. So then you've got them hooked, and then you can weave in main idea through that as well. Also, social studies science, you could do these units, same thing. It works for all subjects. Heidi says, I would keep it in one spot for primary or use Seesaw as it's an easier tool. Okay, yes. So Seesaw is definitely one we're going to talk about. And Heidi has more experience with this than me. So yes, keeping it in one spot might work better for them. My brain is still at 3 through 5 grades. So if it makes more sense that they're always going and clicking into this one document, that might be better. Tori asks, Claire, have you had any directives from the districts as far as elementary having to use Canvas? I unfortunately have not, I don't have any confirmation on this yet, but I will say I have a feeling yes, because I believe they're trying to create consistency among all the schools, all the students, all the parents. So from what I've been told, it's kind of an equity issue of if we have students on all different platforms, then it's confusing for parents and everything's everywhere. So I believe the idea is that trying to get everyone on the same page will help with students all getting material that they need to learn. And also this district can create content to then push out and you could use. They have said that if they create content in Canvas for you to use, you are allowed to modify it. So that's really exciting that you could use things you're learning today and say, well, that assignment they gave me, I bet I could beef it up a little with a different tool. So you should be able to do that in Canvas as well. But I would say that it might be coming. So just be prepared for that transition. These are wonderful questions. Thank you so much for engaging in that discussion. Okay, just a few more things, and then we'll have one question slide at the end as well. So instructional videos. This is something I always hear. Do I have to make my own videos? First of all, no. I will say that when I did all my playlists for a year, I never made my own instructional video. You can if you like, and students love it. They love seeing their teacher, talking to them, and giving them the instruction like they were in front of them in the classroom. So if you have time and you'd like to do that, go for it. I, on the other hand, did not. And so I just assigned pre-made video lessons. That's the last bullet point here on the slide. So I always assigned things from ExactPath or BrainPop or Flocabulary, LearnZillion. If you haven't heard of Zern, it's completely aligned to the Engage New York math curriculum. People have been raving about it. So that is another site. And those are free. The couple of them are free. And then there's the paid sites. Khan Academy is used very often for math instruction. So again, don't feel like you have to make your own instructional videos, but go for it if you want to. If you do want to make your own, a lot of people, as I said, put their Google Slides up and they do a screencasting tool, which I'll tell you a couple of them in a few minutes. And they just screencast and they talk over it like they were doing a lecture. So that's one way to do it. If you want to be on camera and have like a whiteboard behind you that you're writing on, you could use Flipgrid or webcamera.io. And you just get a link and you put it in your Google Classroom or your Canvas. The good thing about Canvas is that a lot of these tools are now working together with Canvas. So I believe Seesaw is now working with Canvas. I think Google Classroom might be. So there may be some crossover that can happen with those. And then another idea is Edpuzzle or Vizia, and these are where you can take a video that already exists, like on YouTube, and you put it into Edpuzzle or Vizia, and you can make stopping points for the students so that they have to stop and answer a question or a little quiz in there. And those are really great because they make the video a little more interactive for the students. So they're not just sitting there and going, I don't know what I just watched. It's making them pause and think and reflect. So I would recommend Edpuzzle or Vizia for that as well. So that's another way you can do instructional videos. So what you've all been waiting for. So no, this is the NEPF, which I believe we are all familiar with. I get this question from administrators a lot is, okay, this all sounds great, but can we observe this on the NEPF? And yes, you can. So I've highlighted the areas that the playlist I showed you where those occur in the Google Classroom playlist. So with the pretest, I was activating standard 1, indicator 1, activating all students' initial understandings. With the engage, explain, apply, create labels and tasks, that's standard 2, indicator 3, where the tasks are progressively developing students' skills. With the questions in Google Classroom or the small groups or the one-on-one lessons, that's standard 3, indicator 1. We're still providing opportunities for extended discourse between the teacher and the students. And then for standard 3, indicator 2, teacher provides opportunities for all students to create and interpret multiple representations. That's when you're providing choice, like having the class dojo videos or portfolios, or maybe they get to draw something. So giving them different tools they can use to explain their learning would fall for that indicator. And then in standard 3, indicator 4, teacher structures the classroom environment to enable collaboration, participation, and positive affect experience. The partner activities allow them to do that, whether it's online or in person. And then also working at your own pace, I really think gives the students that positive affective experience. They're no longer feeling like they're being left behind. They can do it as they need to and get the support they need. And then obviously the summative would be standard 5, indicator 2, teacher aligns assessments, opportunities with learning goals and performance criteria. That's something we always do by having a summative in there. Standard 4, indicator 2, the Google form self-reflection is giving students an opportunity to self-monitor. And so that's something that we don't always do in person unless we kind of do thumbs up, thumbs down doesn't really give us an understanding of where everyone is. But when they submit a Google form, they're able to really tell us, yes, I understand this. Here's where I'm stuck. Here's where I need help. So I think that's really a great way for them to self-monitor. And then finally, Standard 5, Indicator 4, teacher adapts actions based on evidence. That's being able to add items to the playlist. So since we're not just giving it standard to everyone, this student needs some more support, so I'm going to add in some extra assignments to them. So that's just a run through of, if you need to point out where these things fall into the NEPF, they do. This is still teaching. Even though it's online, we're still using the practices we know work for students for learning, and it's still good instruction. So I'm just going to end with some tips and tricks that I've learned along the way that might help. And I think actually I've gone through maybe all of them as we've gone through the presentation, but I just want to re-emphasize them to help support you. So the first is creating suggested due dates, as someone asks. I definitely would do that. I did not do that, and it really set my pacing off for the entire year. And I think students would have completed it in the time that they were supposed to if I had set the strict due dates. Add the video, audio, image explanations as supports when you can. That's really helpful for our emerging readers. Give the feedback online when students are with you. I know teachers are very concerned about how do I talk to those students when they're online, when I have students with me. And I kind of feel as though when they're with you, go into the online system and give the comments, that because they're working on the playlist in front of you, you can be at your computer. We're not just sitting there shopping on Amazon. we're going and looking at the data and the trends, and we're saying, oh, wow, these kids are really not understanding point of view. I'm going to pull them and do a little lesson right now. And so it's not very clean. It's not very structured, but it does ensure that students are all engaged and they're all learning. I might also load in some activities or projects that they know where they are in the Google Classroom or the Canvas that they work on when they're stuck. So you never want them to be at home and say, oh, I didn't do in my playlist because I didn't understand it. Well, then you should always go and work on this additional activity so that you're not just sitting there not learning or doing anything. I had already mentioned I would probably not do worksheets for offline activities. If you want students to do a graphic organizer, I would have an image of it on the screen and they copy it into their notebook. That would probably be the best, just because you don't want them again to get hung up. I was at home and I didn't have access to the worksheet, that kind of thing. Seesaw and Class Dojo, I would use either one for giving an authentic audience. It goes to their parents. They feel empowered. They feel like what they have to say is meaningful. So I would use either system. As Heidi mentioned in the chat, Seesaw is incredible for primary. It's probably incredible for actually all grade levels in that it has activities that teachers have already made and you just assign it to your class. That's something Class Dojo doesn't have right now. So that's why a lot of teachers use Seesaw. So that will cut down a little bit on your work, is seeing what other teachers have made and just assigning it right to your students. Just like the worksheets, I would probably skip the teacher lessons and check-ins as tasks. I'm not saying skip them in general, just as tasks that they have to complete in that order, because again, they might be home when they get to it. Another tip is to gamify it. So when students would pass their playlist, we would all cheer. I would say Joshua passed his summative, or I'm sorry, I would say Joshua leveled up. That's what I called it. And the whole class would go, whoop, there it is. And so it made it really fun. They were really excited. And when they passed their summative, the next class period, they were allowed to go on cool math for the period. And they loved it. It doesn't happen it's every 3 weeks it's happening. So it's not like you're using a ton of class time. And they just really work hard for it. It's pretty incredible. And then finally, I say embrace the messiness. There will be days where you look around and it looks like chaos and you think, is anything going on in here? And actually a ton is going on. It's just not as clean cut as the lockstep we're used to. It takes a lot of adjustment to say, okay, this is okay. This is okay, because everyone's working. So that's just another tip there. And then I just wanted to take a little side note on tips and tricks for emerging readers. And this can be primary students, but also your students that are in the higher grades that maybe are struggling with reading and just need some extra support. A lot of these come from the Google Apps for Littles book by Christine Pinto and Alice Keeler. They say to write out the directions for parents. So even if the student can't read it, the parents can, so it's good to support them. Start assignment titles with numbers so that you can refer students to, hey, you're working on assignment 004. It's a little easier than the long title. They recommend Google Drawing as a good place to start. It's just an easier app for the students and it's fun. Use accessibility features. So for writing, students can't, if they take a long time to write, they can go in Google Docs and go to the tools voice typing feature, and they can speak their writing because they often have really great ideas. It might just take them a long time to write them out. So that's a great way to get them to feel successful. And you can also do text-to-speech in the Chromebook settings. In the Wakelet, I linked to how to change Chromebook accessibility settings in students' Chromebooks. And a lot of them already know how to turn these on, so it's really funny. But they can turn on text-to-speech where the screen will read it to them. So that's really a great support. I talked about Vocaroo for explaining directions, but it can also be used for feedback. So you could paste your Vocaroo link, send a little message to the student, and it's a link and it's you talking. And that is just so great because then they at least get to hear what you had to say about their work if they can't read it. Seesaw for student portfolios and lessons. Again, I think we said Seesaw 4 times. I would definitely check it out. And then follow Coach Ben, as Heidi said. I have a link in the Wakelet as well to his site, and he has amazing videos of things he's done with primary students. Kindergarten is what he taught, but I'm sure it could work in that range as well. I also created, this is in the Wakelet too, I created a document called Digital Tools for Building Online Playlists. And so it has the task types and then the different free tools. So I mentioned screencasting tools. Well, they're right there under Create Your Own Videos. So, and with links. So in that document, if you're thinking, oh, I want to do a podcast, I linked to a free tool that you could do. So that is in the Wakelet for you with all the links of the tools that we've talked about today. All right, we are at our final question period. I appreciate your patience and your engagement. I hope this has been helpful for you so far. So I will go ahead and look at some of the questions. Let's see. Heidi asked, would you give students exemplar examples of the different tasks once you get the exemplars? That is a wonderful idea. Yes, definitely. Especially if it's a task that's a little more complex and students need some guidance on what it looks like. For some students, these tools, they're very savvy about learning how to use tools on their own. I think oftentimes when I haven't even had time to show them a tool, I just give them the link and they go and they figure it out. But I think that giving them an example on some of the more complex tools is definitely a great idea, so they could see, oh, okay, that's what I'm supposed to be doing in there. That's really great. And you could do the exemplars yourself as well. This is what a professional video looks like, and this is what not a professional video looks like. So those kind of things as well. Does anyone have any more questions before we wrap up? Oh, I love it, Suman. She says, okay, my new word for this year is now inspired. I love that we've come full circle to our answer garden. I hope everyone is feeling the same, and I am happy to help support in any way. Again, I am learning every day. I learned so much from Heidi, my colleague in here as well. So we're gonna need each other this year, and we're happy to help. So let me know. The final task is just to show you one more tool, but also to get a little bit of feedback from you. So we're gonna go to Padlet. Padlet is really great. It does limit you to 3 boards right now, but you could always delete one and add them that way. So to access the Padlet, we're gonna go back to the Wakelet. And if you had joined us a little late, this is the link to our Wakelet. And I'm kind of guiding everyone to the Wakelet first before the Padlet, just so that you can make sure you can access it because it has all of the resources that we used. Oops, sorry, Heidi, I sent that to you. It has all of the resources that we used today and I showed you are in the Wakelet. So if you joined us late, please go ahead and look in the chat. I've put the link, it's also up on the screen, bit.ly/playlist resources. And when we get into that Wakelet, Padlet is right here in big white letters with the black. And this is a way to get some feedback from students or to collaborate with their peers. And it is, so I have a question for you right here. It says, click the plus sign in the lower right corner right here and tell us 1 or 2 things from today's presentation you are excited to try. What questions or concerns do you still have about playlists or blended learning? And this will help me to improve this presentation and also to help make new presentations for the Nevada Department of Education. I'm on the professional development and learning team. So if you have any ideas of, I really need to know how to do this, or I want to know more about this in blended learning or digital tools, just let me know. And we are creating those as we go this year, depending on your feedback. I so appreciate your time today. Thank you so much. So go ahead and fill out the Padlet. That way I have some feedback from you. And we will end there. So thank you again for joining us. And this recording will be available on the Nevada Ready YouTube channel in closed captioning. Again, my name is Claire Cummings, and I will see you soon. Thank you.